Let's keep going. In the previous video, we made a door that used a box trigger that allowed the player character to just walk up to that door and have the door automatically slide open as the player approached it. And that's great if that's what you want, but we're going to make some changes to another door in this video that's going to allow it to swing like a hinge door, first of all, and we're also going to allow it to be opened by pressing a key. So I'll show you how this is going to work. I'll just play from here, and I'm going to walk up to our door, but it doesn't automatically open when I walk up to it. I can even walk away from it and nothing happens. But if I decide I want to go through this door, I can hit the E key and the door is going to swing like a regular hinge door. And then I'll walk through, and then if we look behind us, the door will close automatically behind us. So that's the functionality that we're going to add to this door. And while we're doing that, the point of it is yeah, it's nice to know how to make a door swing like a hinge and use that keyboard input. But I also want to show you a whole bunch of nodes in blueprints that are so common, so important. They have hotkeys for most of them. We're going to set the relative rotation of the door to make it swing. We're going to get some variables. We're going to create and set variables. We haven't done that yet. We're going to use a lerp node, a delay, a branch, a sequence, a do once. And then I'm also going to show you the old-fashioned way to use a keyboard input. And there's just newer ways to do it. The input actions, I've got videos on that already. We're just going to do the old school way, which is great if your game is really simple or you're doing just a simulation walkthrough, architectural visualization, and you just want to open a few doors or whatever. That little input key that I'm going to show you how to do is terrific. It's simple, but it also works. And by the end of this video, you should know how to make this door, but more importantly, you're going to know what a lot of these really important nodes do. So I'm going to open up with Control and Spacebar our content drawer. I'm going to find our new slide drawer, the one that we made in the last video. And again, if this is all new to you, if you're like a collision box, what is that? Go back and watch the other video first, because we're going to just build right on top of that. I'm going to right click on this and actually make a duplicate of this. I could do Control D as well, but I can select duplicate from this menu, and we'll call this new swing door, just to differentiate it. And then I'm going to go ahead and double click on the blueprint here and open up the blueprint editor. I'm going to drag this guy and dock it right up here on top next to my map, just so I can move back and forth between them pretty easily. So this is the blueprint that we made last video. In order to walk into the collision box, we're going to check that it's the character. We're going to play a sound. We're going to play a timeline. We can recycle a lot of this, except we're going to make the door move in an entirely different way. We're going to start with that by making the door swing like a hinged door instead of sliding like a Star Trek door. So I'm just going to drag a marquee around all of this, and I'm just going to hit the delete button and lose all that, because we need to remove that. The very first thing we're going to do is make a new timeline. So I'm going to just pull off of this play sound at location node, search for timeline, and then I'm going to select add timeline, just like we did last time. I'm going to just give this a new name like door swing. And then to get into here, we just double click to enter into that door swing timeline. We're going to add a track just like we did last time. So I'm going to click on the plus track button. But instead of using a vector track, remember that's looking for three numbers, X, Y, and Z. That's looking for coordinates in space. We're going to add a float track, which is usually, I think, pretty more common than the vector tracks. And they both serve their purposes, but we tend to be doing float tracks more commonly. So we'll give this a name. We'll just call it swing. Something simple. Again, these names don't really matter. They're just for your reference. And then we're going to change the length of the time of this to match our sound cue here. 2 seconds is pretty good. And I'm going to hit the enter or the return key or the tab key if you're switching over to another field. You need to tell it, I made this change and I like it. Otherwise, it's just going to default. As soon as you click away, it's going to default. We just need to add 2 points on this curve here. I'm going to click on the front of this and say add key to the curve. And while we're here, I'm going to go to the time field and just zero out that keyframe. I'm going to tab over and zero out that value as well. So I'm just giving it 0 and 0 on that first keyframe. And then I'm going to come over here and I'll use the other option, the shift click option that I actually prefer, because it lets you add a whole bunch of them fast. And now I've got my second keyframe, and I'm going to set that time to 2 to the end of our keyframe. And instead of typing in a big number like 170 centimeters that we did last time, I'm just going to type in 1. And all we're using this is just a way to get from 0 to 1. So it's just like a percentage basically that we're doing. I'm going to scroll out and use the right mouse button to scooch down so I can see both of these nodes. And I'm going to drag a marquee around both of them. I'm going to right click on them, and I'm just going to switch over here to auto interpolation just to get us a little ease in, ease out. Again, that's not necessary. You could leave it straight. It's not going to hurt anything, but this just, speeds up and then slows down a little bit nicely, just so you know that you can do that. We're all set here with our timeline. So I'm just going to go back over here to the event graph. Notice we have the swing output, but also notice that swing output is looking for a single number. It's looking for a float now. And before it was yellow and it was looking for 3 numbers. So what we need to do is set the relative rotation of our door. But we're going to run into a problem with our viewport. But let's go ahead and do this right now. I'm going to right click on here and just type in set rel is enough for me to come over here and find the Unreal door. Remember, Unreal door is just the name of that mesh. It's just what I named the piece of static mesh that is the Unreal door. That's not something specific to Unreal. That's just my name. So set relative rotation Unreal door. So that's good. We've got a couple of things that we need to fix over here. First of all, we're going to take a look at our door because we've got a problem back in the viewport we need to address. We'll do that first. But then we also need to look at, these don't connect anymore. If I try to pull out of this like we did last time and plug it in, it's like, oh, it doesn't like that. We got to fix that. So we've got a couple of things to work on. But let's take a look at our viewport first. So I'm going to come back over here to the viewport. Remember, the viewport is where the physical things that appear in the level need to live. So here's our door jamb, our door, and here is the collision box that we're using. So the problem we have right now, if I select the door, is look at where the pivot point of the door is. It's right down in the center of the door. And that's handy for a lot of things. So if I find the rotation over here, the Z rotation, remember Z is up and down, right? We want it to spin around in that direction. If I just click and scrub through this, you can see, okay, that's what we want it to do. We want it to spin like that, except we don't want it to spin in the center like a revolving door. We want it to swing like a hinged door. So we need to move this point. The problem with that is we're already using this static mesh in our sliding door. Now, if you were going to use this on a whole bunch of other doors, maybe it's worth going back to the first door and fixing this and then fixing the other blueprint. But there's another way we can do this. We can add a null object basically to our scene that's going to allow us to do that. And what that's called is an arrow. So I'm going to come up to add and I'm going to just look for arrow. And I'm just going to select that, enter, and then we've got a little problem here because right now the arrow is a child of the door, but we're going to leave it that way for a second. We're going to come back to that so we can move the arrow without moving our door. We want our door to be a child of the arrow, but if we do that now, we're not going to be able to move the arrow. So the first thing I need to do is select that arrow, and now if I move it away from that, you can see the arrow is just like a red arrow. The direction of that arrow matters in some uses. It's not going to matter in our use, so we can just let it sit there going in the X direction. That's fine. I'm going to undo it to put it back where it was. And I'm going to come up here to the view menu for the viewport and just go over to the top view with that arrow selected. And it's kind of hard to see with this like magenta on magenta, but if you can see, there's the door right there, and here's the door jamb. So I'm going to just grab that red move there on the arrow and just scooch it back to where we want it to be. And then I'm also going to scooch it up there because that's where a hinge would be on a door that opens away from you, which is what I want us to do. So that's fine. It's basically where we want that origin point to be. So the origin point's still over here, but we're going to use this origin point to move this door. So I'm going to go back over here to perspective. It's where we need it to be. And now we can come back over here and unparent the arrow from being a child of the door by just clicking and dragging it on top of the Unreal door. I'm just going to drop it over there. And then we're going to do the reverse. We're going to grab the door and drag and drop it on top of the arrow. So now the door is a child of the arrow. So if I grab the arrow, you can see that it jumped over there. And now if I do that little swing movement there, that's what we want it to do. We want it to be moving in that direction there because I'm moving the arrow that is driving the movement of the door. Hopefully that makes sense. And it's doing that because of this little parenting that's going on over there. Just going to hit compile just because my cursor is close to that. It's always a good habit to get into. And then I'm going to go back to the event graph. So we fixed one of our problems, except we have a problem now here. This automatic reference to the door is no longer what we want to be moving here. So I'm just going to delete that and show you that you can drag out a reference for anytime you want by going over here to the components and just clicking and dragging. So if I drop it right now, I could wire it up by hand, but I could also just bring it over here on top of the pin that I want to plug into. And when I release my mouse button there, then it's now automatically wired it up for me. So that's just a little shortcut that can save you a couple of seconds. They all add up. All right, I'm going to make sure that I put the execute pin into this because I'm going to forget that. I'm going to wonder, why is it not working? You can get distracted by other things. We're going to come down here and do some new stuff. This is some important new things. We're going to add some variables because we now need to say, well, all right, what's coming out of here? It's a fraction between 1 and 0, and we need to plug it into here. Actually, let's take care of this first. Right now, we're looking at 3 numbers here. Well, we can right-click on this pin, and we can do split struct pin, split the structure of this in from 1 input into 3 separate inputs. And look what happened. They're now green, right? You want to try to match your colors whenever possible. Grays and whites can take lots of things, but if it's a specific color that isn't gray or white, it's looking for a particular kind of input. So this is going to help. We could now take this and plug that into the Z. Remember, we want to spin it on the Z, the yaw. That likes that, except we're not going to see any movement here because the movement is going to be like 1 degree. It's going to go from 0 to 1. Like that's going to like barely register on that. So that's not what I want to do. I'll just undo that to connect. What we needed to do is to go from the position that it's in to say like 90 degrees open. So the way we're going to do that is by using some variables. So I'm going to come down over here to the My Blueprint section of the window and find this little white plus instead of a white circle there, and I'm going to add a new variable. So when I click on that, I'm just going to call this door closed. And again, it doesn't matter. The names of these, can be whatever you want them to be. But I don't want it to be a Boolean. We're going to use a Boolean later on when we set whether or not the door is open. But the Boolean is a yes, no, open, closed, 1, 0, right? We need this to be a float because we're dealing with fractions, right? We're dealing with some numbers. So I've got a float in there. And now I can come and click on that button again and add another variable, and it's very kindly matched it to our previous one, so we have a new float on here. And I'm going to name this one door open, and then when I hit enter, then now I have 2 variables, except I do need to compile the blueprint. If I want to add default values to these, I have to come up and click compile. I've got to tell the blueprint that there's new variables that it needs to be considering, and now I've got this number. So the door closed, we'll take a look at that first because we're not going to do anything with that. Door closed is just 0. We don't want the blueprint changing the position of the door when we walk up to it. If we made this number different, it would jump to a different position as soon as we entered the collision box. So we want to leave this 0. What we want over here is door open. Well, what do we want that to be? I think this is -90 if I recall. So we want it to swing away from us 90 degrees. So hopefully that's right. We'll find out if I'm wrong. But that's where we can set this default value. And we don't need this to be instance editable. We could open up these eyeballs here and then make these instance editable so that we could change them in every time we use a different instance of this. That's a really handy thing to do, but we'll not worry about that for the moment. We'll just make this a default door that opens 90 degrees. So now what I can do is drag in door closed, and I'm going to get the reference to this. I need to get what it is, not set what it is, because we just have a number in here, 0. And then I'm going to do door open, and then we're going to get that as well. This number is -90, right? But now I have even more of a problem. Okay, I've got 2 things that I'm trying to plug into one thing. Like, and how do I include the timeline in here? Well, what we need to do is use a Lerp. And that's a funny word. I'm going to right click on here and just type in Lerp. And there's a lot of Lerps, but we want the Lerp float. So we're dealing with floats, right? We're dealing with fractional numbers, and we want a Lerp, a linear interpolation. I'm going to click on that. And what this is basically doing is it's just saying, go from this to this over a certain amount of time or a certain amount of number, right? So we're going to plug the door closed, which is what we want to start with, the 0, and put that in the A. We're going to put the door open and put that in the B. Then what's going to drive this? That's where we bring our timeline in. We're going to plug this in and say, all right, every 48th of a second here, or 24th of a second here, we're going to be scooching this number from farther away from 0 and closer to 1. So we're going to be pushing this a little bit more and more and more. So now I can take this return value and I can just plug that into the new rotation. So it's going to look at this. When we first walk in, it's going to look at this and say, oh, it's 0, which is what it is now, right? No change. And then 1/24th of a second later, it's going to move it a tiny little bit toward this number, toward the 1, which is going to then, swing our door toward the -90, right? So not dealing with the 1s up here. This is the -90. So it's going to scooch it a little bit. So maybe it's going to make it like -0.5 or something. And on the next tick, it's going to make it -1. And then it's going to keep on adding this. And it's just going to keep adding to the rotation till 2 seconds is up and our door has reached all the way to 90 degrees. So hopefully that makes sense. Linear interpolations are super common. It's something you use all the time when you just need to get from point A to point B. They're very useful for that. So let's go and see if this works here. I think we're all set to make this work. We're not going to worry about the door closing behind us, but we can compile and save. And I'm going to go back to my first person map. I'm actually going to delete the one that I'm using now. And we're going to go find ours, new swing door. And I'm just going to drag that new swing door into the scene. And then I'll play from here. And let's see how we do. We walk up to the door and the door opens beautifully and it swings away from us. And then as we walk away, nothing happens because we broke all of that code, but we can go back and fix that. So far so good. We got the door to swing instead of sliding sideways. Now we're going to add the code that's going to allow us to use that E key or whatever key you decide to open this door. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go back to the code. I'm going to grab all of this over here and I'm going to scooch this back, although I am going to deselect and then grab the actor location, move it back over here to the sounds. That's actually what we're dealing with. And I'm going to come into this execute pin, hold the Alt key down and click, and we're just going to break those two for now because we're going to separate this out. What I want to do is to make it so that the player decides when to open the door by pressing a key. So we'll add that first in here. So if I come over here and just right click on here and say keyboard, and then I can scroll down through here and find any keyboard letter or number that I want. So I'm just going to find E because that's a common one. And now I've got an input here for an E. I'm going to take this and put the pressed into the play sound. We're only going to worry about opening it for the time being. Then we'll go back and fix the closing in a minute. So if we were to come over here and press E, then we're going to fire off all this code and it's going to open up our door as it was before, except it's not looking for this right now. We need to tell it to look for this. So what we can do is come back over here to our on component overlap, and instead of having that drive the door opening, we can have this just say like, hey, when you walk into this box, start looking for a keyboard input. And the way we're going to do that is to add two nodes, enable and disable input. So I'm just going to right click and type enable in, and I'm going to grab enable input, and that'll do the exact same thing for disabled. Disable input. So there we go. And I'm going to plug that in. So when you walk into the box, it's going to enable the input. And then when you walk out of the box, it's going to disable the input. And the input is this. So you pressing the key outside of the collision box isn't going to do anything because we're too far away from the door to open it. But when we walk into that collision box, we can stand there as long as we want. As soon as we hit the E key, it's going to fire off the rest of this code. Because there's one more thing we need to do over here. We have to tell it, well, what are you looking for? And we need to tell it what player controller to use. So this is a really good example of a place where you want to click from the pin and drag away from this. Because then if you just type the word get, there's very few things that make sense to plug into this. So getting player controller is already highlighted for us. That's what we want. We're going to plug that in. That's where the context sensitive can be your friend sometimes. And then I'm going to plug this return value down into the player controller on this end so we can reuse this for both because it's the same player controller. And it's kind of weird, but that's it. This is good right now because this is its own little chunk of code. It's saying when you walk into the box, check first person character. Yep. And also start listening for input. And then it's done its job. And then if you walk out of the box, it's going to stop listening for that E key pressed. So this is going to work. If we compile and go back in, and I'll just play from here, we can now walk up to the door and the door doesn't automatically open, but it does if we hit the E key. So I just hit the E key, now the door opens, and if I walk away, it's not doing anything because we haven't repaired that bit of the code. But this is where it gets a little trickier. So if that's all you want is just, door to open or a light switch to go on or whatever with a keyboard shortcut, you're done, you're good. But now I want to teach you about all these other ones, the delay, the branch, the sequence, the do once, and all of that, and then the getting and setting some variables. Because we want to make sure that we have the ability to walk up to this door and walk away from the door, in our case, without the sound playing. So if we were to walk up to the door, listen, hear a monster, and decide, oof, I need to go get some health potions. I'm not ready to go tackle whatever's on the other side of this door. I'm going to walk away from this door. What we will be telling it in the code is when you walk out of this box, play the sound of the door shutting. But I never opened the door. And that's, a very simple problem that we need to fix with this, but it's the kind of thing that will come up all the time where when you give players choice, they're going to do things that you don't expect. So I didn't expect you to walk away from the door. I expected you to open the door and fight the monster. So we're going to go back to that code and add some new things in here. So we've got a little bit more between these two. So I'm actually going to grab all of this little bit over here. Oh, this is also maybe a good point to talk about the C key. If you hit the C key, that gives you a little comment box so you can drag the box around, and we'll just call this input. You name it whatever you want. And now I can just grab the box and then move that around. So it's just kind of like a little grouping of nodes that can be useful. But now what I want to do over here is decide whether or not that door is open. We need to say, is the door open or not? Did the player open the door, or did the player walk away without opening the door? And in order for us to do that, we need is it open or not? What kind of variable would that be, right? We're going to come down and add a variable. Is it open or not? When I add that, I'm going to go ahead and say door open. And maybe I'll just give it a question mark. So door open. And so I had to add that question mark on there because I already had door open. I could have named this, is door open or something like that, but they can't be identical. So that question mark will make a difference in there. Except this doesn't want to be a float, because remember, a float is a number, fractional number. I want to pop this open and go back to the Boolean, because that's a yes, no, is it or not, right? So door open. The first thing we need to do is check whether or not the door is open. And a lot of this is actually on the leaving part, right? Right now it's working. If what we want to do is walk up to it, hit the E key, go through the door, that's already working. What we need to do is actually what happens if you walk out of the box with the door not open yet. So we're actually going to be on this half of the code. So what I want to do now is grab is door open. I'm going to drop that on the blueprint, and I'm going to get is door open. We'll set it in a little bit here, but we're going to get it. We want to know, is it open or not? So there's the get. And then what we need to do is say, all right, if we walk out of this, is the door open? Yes or no? And the way we do that is with one of these incredibly common ones. I'm going to hold the B key down and click on the screen there, and that's going to give me a branch, B for branch. And the condition is, well, what is it? Is it open or not? So the door open, and we also need to compile. We actually don't need to do this just yet, but I'll just show you that it's important that the door open is set to not open by default, which is good. We want this to not be open, because if we walk up to the door, listen, don't open the door, and then back away, it needs to be closed. Unless the door is open in your game by default, and then the player character shuts the door to make things happen. But in most cases, we're walking up to a closed door. So we want this to be closed by default. So we're going to come out of here, out of the disabled input, and I'm going to plug it into the branch over here. So we're going to walk out of the box and we're going to say, is the door open? Yes or no. If it's not open, then we're not going to do anything. We don't want any sounds to play or any actions to happen. We want nothing to happen, as if this door isn't even a blueprint, if it's just a picture on the wall, right? So everything else is going to happen out of this true. But we want three things to happen now. We can do that with a sequence node. I'm going to hold the S key, S for sequence, down, and I'm going to click and get sequence on the graph. So we need to do three things here. So I'm going to come and add another pin. You can add as many of these as you want. And remember, computer science starts with 0. So this is actually the first thing it's going to do, the second and the third thing. Don't let the 0 confuse you. We're going to go ahead and plug the is the door open? Yes, it is. So now we need to do some stuff up here into the sequence. And the very first thing we need to do is reset the ability to do this door again. So I'm going to push this back, and we're going to use another one. I'm going to right click on here and look for do once. And do once does what it says, right? Basically, do once is very useful, especially when you get sounds involved or you want things to not automatically repeat. So I'm going to come out of pressed and plug that into do once, and then I'm going to put the completed back into the sound. And the nice thing about this is that it's only going to do all of this nonsense down over here once until we reset it. And we're going to reset it when we leave the box over here. So that's the very first thing we're going to do. Otherwise, if we leave this do once in here without resetting it, then you can only go through that door once, and then the door will always be open. There's no way to close it. There's no way to go through it again until you restart the level. So this is going to allow us to let that this door be closed and then opened again by resetting it. The next thing that we need to do over here is just go ahead and fire off the regular sequence over here. We're just putting back what we had before. So the door sound will play and the door will close. We need to actually plug in the reverse. We didn't do that before. So we're going to grab off of the play sound at location, plug it into the reverse, just like we did. That just plays this timeline backwards. So the door will shut. I'm glad I saw that. And then the next thing we need to do is just set this, because right now what's happening is the door is open. If we've gotten to here, then the door is open, but we're going through the actions to close that door. So the last thing we need to do is change this variable to setting it to be closed again. So I'm going to drag door open question mark, drop it onto the blueprint, and this time I'm going to say set door open. And that's going to give me this little box over here. And all I need to do is plug this in over here, except it's a good case, a good opportunity for us to introduce another really useful one with a hotkey. Hold the D key down and click on your graph to get a delay node. And the reason why we're going to add a delay node is we just want this to reset when the door is actually done being closed, if that makes sense. So I'm going to drag this into here, and I'm going to drag the completed into this set variable. And the duration, I'm going to click on the duration field, and then backspace and type in 2. It was set to 0.2 there. So I'm going to set it to 2 because 2 seconds is how long our door closing animation and sound effect is. So it's going to, once it's done all of this over here, it's going to hold its breath for 2 seconds. And then it's going to set this variable to, oh, it's closed again. We don't need to do anything with this because if we're here, it's going to be set open, which we're going to add that little bit here in a second. So it's saying yes to this. It is open. This is true. So true, all of this stuff. Now we need to set it back to false. So we actually don't want to check this box. It's tempting to come in here and like click this little box, but we're going to do that next up over here in the corner. So if I go back to, this is the first time we're doing, hitting the E key, we're opening the door, we're doing all this, we're setting its relative location. So at the very end over here, here is where we set this. So back to the variable door open, I'm going to drag, I'm going to set it on the end over here. I'm going to connect the execute pins. And then this time I am going to check this box because is the door open? Well, it is now because we just went through all that code. So then if we walk away from the door and we walk back to that door again, it's going to say, is the door open? Well, yes, it is now. And then it's going to fire all of this. So hopefully that makes sense. So this looks like a little bit of a spaghetti, but it's actually pretty simple if you look at all of this one at a time. And the nice thing about this is that we've gotten through how to add the hardwired keyboard. You can type in any letter you want. You can have multiple letters that do different things, even in the same code. That's fine. We've talked about how to get and set variables over here. We've talked about lerps and the delay, the branch, the sequence, the do once. These are all like absolute foundational kinds of nodes that you'll use all the time. But I'm going to go ahead and compile, jump back into the game level. We'll play from here and we'll make sure this all works. I'm going to walk up to the door. Nothing happens. I'm going to hit the E key. Door is opening, getting the sound effect. I'm going to walk away from the door this time. The door is going to close as I exit that box, and it's all ready to go. Press the E key again, and it's going to reset so that I can go through the door and it's going to automatically set. Now, one thing you could do, we're not going to mess with that now, this video has been long enough, but you could probably figure this out on your own. You could probably break into this and say, well, all right, well, what if I want the player to decide whether or not the door shuts behind them? You could break into some of this and actually get the E key to shut the door. That's something you might want to do in a stealth game or a survival game or whatever. Run into a room and shut the door behind you to hide. Or maybe you want to leave the door open so you can run away really fast or whatever. So that's something else that you could easily add to this code. So there's a lot in this video. Thanks for getting to the end. And hopefully you've got a whole lot of new things to start playing around with and making your own kind of doors that swing in different directions and different kinds of functionality with this really foundational stuff.